So really happy to be here. Got a great panelists of, well, quite a few Canadians actually on the panel. We're going to go through, we don't have a ton of time, but we'll go through some introductions. We'll find out what got each of these guys into genetics, and then we'll just kind of start an organic conversation and see where it takes us. So I guess we'll start with you, Manny, if you just want to introduce yourself and maybe, give a little bit of a background. We don't have a ton of time, so it's like a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes each. What got you into genetics and how you ended up on this pathway?
Hello. What up? Canada's in the house, I can see. So I'm Manny De Silva. I was originally born in Portugal. I hold dual citizenship as I'm a Canadian citizen as well. My experience started with cannabis when I was about 14 and started growing when I was about 15, 16, and quickly learned that there was more to this plant than just putting a seed in the ground. And we started experimenting with different males and females, and it just became a lifelong passion to be able to see the different expressions that we could get out of each individual cannabis strain. That led me to make transition into the legal market in early 2015, 2016. Owned my own facility, which I just sold last year. And in the meantime, I had met some wonderful people in Israel, and we started a company out of there called Green Boys. And we do import-export of only high-grade cannabis out of Canada to various parts in the world, and we also supply genetics to various facilities.
Well, God bless you for that.
Thank you.
Dave, same question, little introduction and how you got into the genetics.
My name is Dave Auger. I'm the commissioner for Big League Genetics. We've been selling genetics across Canada for the past 2.5 years. I got my start in cannabis breeding and genetics. The first time I ever I grew some Panama Red and some Blueberry and White Widow, ended up with a male, threw some pollen around and was pretty excited about the outcome. We pheno hunt. We've got a 20,000 square foot grow that we produce cannabis for international markets. We actually have some new stuff doing an epic drop here in Germany in the next few weeks. And we sell flower into Israel, and we provide genetics now all over the world.
Excellent. How about you, Steve?
Hello. Hi, guys. My name's Steve Tan. I started growing 26 years ago, turn of the century. Why did I get into it? I grew 3 strains for nearly 4 years. NL5 Haze, Sensi Star, UK Cheese. I came out of the dot-com boom, making too much money, going into weed. And, since then, I've traveled the world. I enjoyed Marcus's company, when he had dreadlocks in a tent, coming out of Jamaica. Must have been, 2001, 2002? Yeah. And, fast forward that, mucked around in California for 3 or 4 years, played in the Bay Area, grew in hybrid greenhouses. I like greenhouses. I like the moving ship. Indoor bores me these days. And, so I kind of cater genetics for greenhouses. I like a lot of the minor cannabinoids. I like to put flavor on CBD. So I like these little interesting niche markets. And I think, weed should be for everyone. And, we can all debate about high THC and all that jazz. But I think, there are a lot of areas that I think in 2 or 3 years will become more prevalent. And, I invite everyone here to, push against the boundaries and, release products that your marketing companies are telling you we can only have these kind of profiles. And, sensory panels in Canada just started, and I think those things are good. And really understanding your supply chain after genetics. Innovation happens after you have the plant. Marcus talked about something about, rosin and supply chain with that, right? Unless you can have a cold line going straight through, and I remember that talk somewhere, you can't show the strength of those genetics. And, extraction genetics are going to be very different from dry flower genetics. Equatorial greenhouse genetics are going to be very different from Canadian outdoor. So I think I'll just stop there.
All right, we'll finish off with Jameson.
Thanks, Marcus. My name is Jameson Wellborn. I'm managing director of the Banyan Tree. We work with a lot of legacy participants to leverage their intellectual property, mostly through seeds and cuts, into newly legal markets. My relationship with the plant started a little later at the end of high school, and by university I was lighting up multiple houses and having a really good time. I was an ADHD child, and so when I found cannabis, I really found what worked for me, and it curtailed my alcohol and other drug consumption and made a major positive impact in my life, and it's something I continued on. And after university, I kind of came clean with what I was doing for my beer money to my family and what I wanted to continue doing with the plant, and they quickly put a stop to that. So I worked in the corporate world for about 4 or 5 years before seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in Canada and legalization, and started consulting in the space, working with a few publicly traded companies, and then ultimately helping a few startups get started, one cultivation business, one genetic business that's up here beside me, before I decided to go off on my own and start my own business. And yeah, I've spent more time putting my focus and energy into championing the breeders and pheno hunters and hash makers than I have actually done in breeding myself. So I really like to think of myself as more of an agent that is able to speak and bring these talented artists into these newly legal markets and leverage all the work that they've done in the quote unquote gray space.
So that brings me to the next question, which is great. The legacy market and the market, the history of breeding in cannabis has often been connected to these almost savant-like people who are spending time with the plant. They're going in and they're checking subtle nuances in the grows, whether it's outdoor, greenhouse, indoors. I'm wondering what you guys all think, and I'll give you all the chance to answer this question. How you see breeding moving into the future, away from traditional methods and into tissue culture, CRISPR methods, DNA fingerprinting, where we can now identify very easily through tissue culture and fingerprinting what gene synthases are present on the plant, whether they're turned off or turned on, and how is this going to help us breed for novel cannabinoids, novel volatile organic compounds as we move out of traditional methodologies and gain these scientific advantages? We can start with you if you like, Manny.
So one of the things that we're starting to see is the recognition between the human and cannabinoid system and the cannabinoids that are produced by the plant. The outlying area that we're missing is the connection between those two. Not every single strain is going to work for every single patient. And point in case, you look at Charlotte's Web, that was an amazing discovery for Charlotte, but a lot of children that were brought and given the same medicine did not do well with it. The efficacy wasn't there. And so I think through breeding and through using things like DNA, human DNA, we can find that connection and be able to prescribe better medicine for people.
Thanks, Manny. Dave?
We're not growing in basements and attics anymore. That's why we're big league genetics. This is the big leagues now. We're getting scientists involved. DNA is a factor. There are viruses and all kinds of different things that you need to look out for as it relates to the commercialization of a strain. Just because something worked in somebody's backyard or their tent doesn't mean that you're going to be able to operate 100,000 square feet of it and put food on families' tables and participate in international commerce and everything else. So more and more science is going to be dedicated to this over the next 10 years. Marker-assisted breeding is already happening, and I think it's going to continue that way.
Thank you. Steve?
Marcus, that topic, I might hijack that topic because we have a startup and we've already done 2 CRISPR-Cas9 edits. We've got these seeds now at the University of Guelph, and we've done knock-ins and knockouts. I didn't actually realize you were going to pose a question like that, but so I'm going to plug our biotech startup called Hypercan, and we're working with a molecular biologist who has also developed best-of-class yeast-based enzymes with improved cannabinoid synthases. So, to go backwards and forwards on the question, Jonathan Page at Anandia really did a lot of great work, and I think he was based maybe in Berlin, I forget. But at that stage, and corporate cannabis definitely knocks good R&D down, because to do good plant R&D, you're really talking 10 years. And the way the corporate cannabis situation that's happened in Canada has made me realize that working with universities provides me with a longer, more stable pathway. So we've taken these seeds, which, for the record, are non-GMO point mutation edits. And when we breed these seeds, we will be crossing these point mutations. And our first knockout is actually taking THC out. So we can produce a plant that is truly 0% THC for markets like the Asian market, the Japanese market, which want to grow cannabinoids, but they don't want THC. So, editing and engineering won't come up in our space, I think, at least 3 to 5 years. Marker-assisted breeding and pangenomic work is happening very strongly. And I'll plug, a great company in Switzerland called PureGene. They've done amazing stuff. And there are also other companies, I believe, in Canada and, many more in different states that are working on these things. I think what they have and what we didn't have is they have scale, they obviously have science, and to measure minor cannabinoids like CBC, Vs, and these kind of things, you really need science behind you. We can't test smoke it, we can't use our CPG values to understand it. We don't have the ailments. I couldn't tell you if a CBD product works. I just couldn't tell you as a user. So I think science is going to take it. I believe in legacy. I think the CPG, the flavor, the Louis Vuitton, the Louis XIII alcohol, I think that's all going to come from a CPG value brand. And I feel that we'll all be in that empowerment. But I think, we will have to play with these guys, because they are going to build bulletproof plants that are PM resistance, viroid resistance, but then they'll need our flavor profiles to layer with it. So I think that's where that relationship will be. They'll build powerhouse cars, but they'll still need us to put the flavor on it, or at least I hope. So I think, I think that's where we are.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jameson.
I think that over the next 10 years, there's going to be a clear and definitive line between artistic breeding and pheno-hunting and scientific-backed breeding and pheno-hunting. And the reason I say that is, just like tobacco, we're seeing the actual smoking combustion of tobacco reduce, but we're seeing the vaporization of nicotine pens and things like that increase. We're going to see that same thing take place over these markets in any legalized or unlegalized market, and each market happens to be at a different point in its evolution. But when you really look at the ability to assign drug identification numbers, make medical applications, or you're going to see individuals using CRISPR and things that Stephen talked about to separate out different parts of the plant, where you're going to have certain breeding projects made for specific volatile organic compounds, and the THC and CBD that plant produces, or the overall inflorescence of the plant, isn't going to be a vital key factor, because that's going to be destined for isolation and extraction. And then those different marker-assisted breeding projects, where one will be for high THC, one will be for CBD, one will be for beta-caryophyllene, one will be for valencine, will all be utilized en masse and extracted. And when you're not looking for the optimal concert of all of the different characteristics that you're looking for, that we see in artistic pheno-hunting and breeding, where the plant needs to hit hard, taste good, be powdery mildew and mold resistant, and resistant to drops in cold temperatures, those factors won't have to all line up when you're only focusing on one characteristic. And I think that will be isolated to the medical side, where extraction-focused drug identification numbers are being sought after, and that will likely be the larger portion of the market. And then the craft, artisanal side is going to still remain with the pheno-hunters who are looking for that overall experience in that plant.
Yeah, I definitely don't think you're wrong. I see in these pharmaceutical markets that they want to stabilize, and they're scientists, so they have to understand that stabilizing volatile organic compounds is impossible. You can't do it. So this is what Jameson's saying. You've got one group who are like, let's stabilize it. Well, how do you stabilize it? You short path molecularly distill it, you reduce all of the volatile compounds out of it, and then you're left with cannabinoids. Oh, look, it's stable. Yeah, but now it's boring. It no longer has those volatile organic compounds, but it does fit into the pathways that are this medical pharmaceutical pathway. I also wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of tissue culture. All of the clonally produced plants on the planet currently being clonally produced are done through tissue culture. Cannabis is one of the only plants that's not done through tissue culture. So the question I wanted to pose to each of you as breeders that are producing genetics or representing these artesian breeders you're selling their genetics, how important is it for you guys to understand? Because if you give someone a plant that is completely impregnated with viruses and bacteria and fungi, and they go and try to grow this genetic, it doesn't matter how good of a grower they are, they're not going to be able to get the plant to express itself the way it should. Often in the industry, this looks bad on the breeder instead of the grower and it's not even the grower's fault in that sense. So how important do you guys think it's going to be to have your genetics initiated through tissue culture, to have any type of anything, bacteria, fungi, viruses, removed from the plant before it goes into production? Do any of you guys think of that?
Yeah, tissue culture's immensely important. It's not a silver bullet, but it's absolutely, especially with Germany and European markets and international markets operating all over the world. Just like Marcus said, if you've got viruses, you've got problems. Seeds aren't necessarily safe. And so we have a tissue culture lab for Big League. I'm sure others of you up here also working with tissue culture. It's definitely a very useful tool in the toolbox to be able to make sure that you've got stuff stored in vitro that is safe. We do a lot of pheno hunting at our facility, and so we will run large populations of different types of seeds that we don't know what might have been, what might be contracted, and so you want to make sure that when you're starting a new facility or taking in genetics from somewhere else, that it's been tested, that it's safe, or at least as safe as you can be, and then making sure that you've got the fail safes in place to to be able to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Dave. Like when you're selling, championship racing horses or race, premier breeding dogs, they need to come with their hips shot and all the test results, and that's really what this is, bringing this into a time where all the T's need to be crossed and the I's need to be dotted. And when you're realizing the value in having and the time that we save these cultivators through these pheno hunting processes, a lot of these cultivators, I know we saw it in Canada where they would raise a bunch of money, they'd make a bunch of promises to their shareholders, and then they'd say, we've got a bunch of seeds and we're gonna hit the ground running and we're gonna have a crop ready in 4 months for you guys. And then the C-suite learns about this pheno hunting process, and the growers at the board table trying to explain what pheno hunting is. And he's going, okay, if you and your wife have 100 kids, they're gonna be short and tall and fat and wide and skinny and smart and stupid. And we've gotta find the LeBron James of your kids. And that's what pheno hunting is. And that can take 8 months or 12 months or 16 months, depending on how lucky you are. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of value that, us as genetic providers add that sometimes is a hard-learned lesson for newly created companies and C-suites that aren't as much educated on that process. And with that responsibility and with the price that, is demanded, needs to come proper testing. So, I mean, tissue culture is just the start. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done and provided. Whether you're doing nodal tissue culture or meristem tissue culture, you need to educate yourself on that process and, where it's coming from and all the tests you need. I mean, hop latent is what's on the tip of everyone's tongue, but there's tobacco mosaic. There's a list of other, lettuce sclerosis. There's a list of other tests that need to be performed to really feel confident in the genetics that you're bringing into your facility. And even when you have all those things, you need to have a quarantine program in place before those genetics go into commercialization.
Just to elaborate a little bit on what Marcus was saying about good genetics and growers. A lot of times the growers in these companies get a very bad rep because they have a bad genetic, and a good grower can be brought down by a terrible genetic, just like a terrible grower can be brought up by a good genetic. The other thing that's important is that a lot of people think that you can just get a genetic and start growing and it's going to be wonderful. I've learned over time that it takes roughly 8 turns of any single genetic to be able to have a good understanding of that plant and how it's going to express itself and what it likes, what it doesn't like, what temperatures you can take it to. So there's a lot more to this. For me, I think it's somewhat disappointing that the industry has such a low value for genetics. They all believe that they should be able to pay next to nothing for them. Yet genetics are what these companies are making their money off of. If they don't have good genetics that produce good quality flower, how can you expect to sell it?
And I think, to pick up on that, I mean, I have a slide, and Microsoft invests 10 to 12%, 15% on R&D. When I talk to big LPs and I sit them down, I'm saying, like, you guys need to invest 2.5 to 5% of your revenue on your innovation, on your plants, on your genetics. Whether you want to run your own programs, do your own feminizing, do it in-house, have a good guy, has a good background. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are doing that. Whether you want to, go to the market, pick the latest Cali hype strains, that's all good. But, to focus, Marcus, on tissue culture, the reason why cannabis hasn't turned into bananas, and everything else, it's actually quite easy to maintain mothers if you know what you're doing. Yes, the disease element is there. Yes, biobanking has an advantage. But if you try and send 1,000 TC cuts across the border at the moment, it's a nightmare. So, we send fresh cuttings. We put fresh cuttings in a bag and we send them. And that's worked great. So, the history of tissue culture is trying to fit a triangle into a square. And, cannabis is very different. So the reasons why we don't use tissue culture is, banana and durian and a lot of other bamboo propagation is a lot harder. These plants root in 6 to 10 days. And they're pretty bulletproof. And, hot latent viroid and some of these stuff, I know guys that put that into their TC room because that's such a mess on its own. So just because you have TC doesn't mean you're going to avoid diseases. It's more about your baker, who does it, how they do it, and your formulations between different strains, and all of that kind of jazz. Yeah.
Well, after coming out of about 100 years of cannabis prohibition and all living under the mentality of how much can I get and how fast can I get it, i.e. flowering times and vegetative growth, how much does it affect you guys in your breeding of your genetics now that people seem to be more understanding and interested in the production of cannabinoids and volatile organic compounds, which don't necessarily correlate to vegetative yields finishing in 7 to 8 weeks? Don't understand the question?
So, if you want to look at some companies, you can value their output by pure cannabinoid output. So rather than biomass. So to start there, as we know, extraction plants have slightly more open profiles, your oil per kilo ratio, your value chain is to your extractor. So if you grow extraction strains, you add a value chain to them. If you grow dry flower strains, then that's that. If you look at your whole plant as a total cannabinoid output and you value that as pre-roll, trim, dry flower, and you take that type of strategy, then you start to understand and don't do what, and I lived in Canada for the last few years, don't do what the Canadians do, which is, we're just going to make a hash line from the trim off the greenhouse. And, that's...
Not this Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah, and we all know the first hash products that came out weren't built for that. And hash plants actually don't do well indoors because of their leaf to bud ratio. And so you're going to see different environments and different markets being operated for different segments because it's clearly and we're building good autoflowers. California, who hated feminized seeds, who hated autoflowers, now they're making a lot of autoflowers, field extraction. Some of the Emerald Cup winners are now being turned into autoflowers, I hear. And, people are trying to run these. So you're trying to get an acre of, cannabinoid output. So calculate your stuff not on biomass, because that's not really where you're going to win. You're going to win on quality cannabinoids or volatiles, depending on the market you want. So put that into your business plans, figure that out, and that works a lot better, I think, getting you somewhere.
I'd add to that. Depending on your customer, at least for us, the customer's desire and outcome is really, kind of where we start the genetic conversation. There's certainly, I don't know how many times today I got asked if we have high THC, if we got high THC strains. So that's obviously the first and foremost on anybody's mind. We try to look after our customer and their goal for what they're trying to achieve. A lot of our customers right now are selling dry flower, and that's what they want. And so, sometimes that's where it ends up for extraction, but a lot of times it's, this is what they're looking for. So, yield and potency is still, it's what on the front of everybody's mind right now.
High THC opens the door, whether you move the conversation forward or not, and then you can really, dependent on the company structure and how they make their decisions, the overall yield, the flower time, and the amount of volatile organic compounds all play a role in a different order for different companies. And so there's a situation that we're facing right now where the uneducated and uninitiated want to assign a value to a percentage, and that's how they're able to achieve sales volumes, and that's how they're able to communicate value to the end sellers and users. And so even though most of us up here have had 18% cannabis that has far outdone any 35% cannabis that we've smoked, that's not the reality right now. And so having a threshold of a THC number that is going to get the conversation started, and then you can start looking at, okay, well, this one finishes in 8 weeks and this one finishes in 6, but the 6-weeker doesn't yield as much grams per square foot as the 8-weeker and is a little bit less powdery mildew resistant, and we're dealing with powdery mildew in our facility. So you have to weigh all these variables and work with your cultivators and your clients to find the right fit for that genetic. So I really think that cannabinoids opens the door to the conversation, and it's a full stop or start. You can't go, okay, I've got something that finishes in 6 weeks, yields great per square foot, but it's only 18%. They're going to say, we don't care. It could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. We're not going to look at it. But once you get over that 25, 26% threshold, then other characteristics and factors start being put at play.
So just to go back on the whole THC thing, it's something that I don't think we talk about enough. I think it's a real misnomer that we use THC as the barometer for quality in cannabis. We're trying to equate THC in the same way that they do with alcohol. The problem is, with a bottle of alcohol, if it says it's 40%, it is from the top to the very bottom. You can't have that with cannabis. You have 1,000 plants with 30, 40 colas on it. They're not all going to be the same, and it's unfortunate that this industry has been so pigeonholed in how we present cannabis to the customer. Like in the days when we were doing it and we were doing packs, you basically opened up a bag, you liked how it looked, you liked how it smelled, and that's the reason why you bought it. Today, the consumers, all they have is a number to go by. And it's a terrible way to represent cannabis.
Well, it leads me to our last question, because I believe we are close to the end, Gaio. Another 4 or 5 minutes. So this will be a perfect question for you guys, each of you to answer. In your perfect world, in your utopian cannabis breeding world, how does the future look?
I think the future looks really good because we are making some really big steps in cannabis breeding with the science base that we have now and the legacy ways that we did things. It's starting to come together, and I think that in future we're going to be able to develop genetics that are going to be able to target certain cannabinoids and certain profiles even better than we do today. So I think it's a bright future on the genetic side. Go ahead.
I think it's, I think it's good and bad. I think that there's a bright future and a lot of exciting things with genetics and still yet to be discovered and explored. I'm kind of an old beanhead, and I've been collecting seeds for a really long time. I like new stuff, and I like the old stuff. And I'm, with new countries coming online, if we're pulling out of genetic banks from Canada, the population that we get to pull from is going to get smaller and smaller. There will be breeding projects that expand on that, but there will be stuff that's truly lost. And as I guess a bit of a preservationist, landrace preservation and stuff that's just old. Like Thailand is gone through legalization right now. A lot of Cali genetics are over there, and there's an impact to that. There's going to be crossbreeding that's going to happen, and pure Thai land races are going. That genetic bubble has now been penetrated, and so there will be less things like that. And for me, I guess that's a little bit sad. Yeah. But the future is definitely exciting. Marker-assisted breeding towards, going after a certain potency or a certain cannabinoid or terpene value, effect. All of that's very exciting stuff. But I guess the old beanhead in me is still like, I'd like to pop some old Durban poison and see what we find.
Wow. It started optimistic, it went medium. I'm not sure if I could go downhill or uphill on the future of cannabis genetics. I could say, half of us might not be here in 3 to 5 years. I think, I'll touch on Dave's optimism. It's so cool, at my age, 46, to come in and have all these tools and to be able to go back into my old seed bank and open it up, pull it out, turn it left, right, center, get support, have stuff that I'm not worried about the door getting knocked down and losing that shit. Today, if you collect winning racehorses, you should be able to hold on to them. We never had that privilege, and I think that's amazing. I think the future is going to split like the artisan corporate, and I think that's inevitable. And I think, DNA fingerprinting and all these things are going to give the small guy a little bit more tools. I think the pressure will be on maintaining facilities, maintaining biobanks. I think good relationships, exclusive relationships will become stronger as things close down, as the market matures. Yeah.
I think it's going to be more science and less art. I think if you take all the colors of the rainbow and mix them together, you end up with brown. We're dealing with a lot of just polys on polys on polys, and the names are the only things that differentiate these things. And if you open up a large enough population, you're going to find everything that you were looking for in your other packs in one pack. And so I think that, unfortunately, like Dave said, the bubble has been popped. I've spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, and you can see auto flowers, and you can see wide leaf, different expressions that have been brought into the country to help the cannabis population, but really it's hurt it. And so I think that as we move to a more scientific and cannabinoid value-based world, we're moving away from the magic of selecting based off experience. And I really think that that's sad, but I think it's the reality that we're heading towards. And until there's going to be some type of renaissance that we saw in alcohol, very similar to 100 years of 6 different beers in Canada, those were what you had to pick from. And then eventually there's this renaissance of beautiful craft beers coming to market, and that's when individuals like guys on this panel who've been holding on to beans for a long time are able to bring them forward and find value in a market that currently doesn't denote value for those quality markers and characteristics. So I think it's going to get dark, and then it might get a little light.
Well, I have a utopian view of cannabis, and the way I see it is once we have to stop promoting the lie that is you need to protect children from cannabis, once the regulatory dissipates and is removed massively, I look forward to personally, because for me, genetics are nothing without the Appalachia and the terroir to allow those genetics to express themselves. And I look forward to the day where I can purchase Lebanese hash in Canada. And
I say that all the time.
Yes, of course.
Moroccan
right?
hash.
I want to taste. I want to taste the Appalachia.
You can buy French wine.
Yeah.
You could buy Australian wine.
And you'd pay a lot of money for it, right?
We'll
You'd
see.
pay a lot of money for it, wouldn't you?
I would pay a lot of money.
I would pay a lot of.
If I
I
could
would
get some
pay more.
Afghani hash in San
right?
Francisco.
Well,
man,
and
I'll give you €100 right now.
We may find that there are appellations and terroirs that we have never tasted because they were so prohibited. They weren't Afghanistan or Morocco or Himachal Pradesh, Parvati Valley, Nepal, all of these hash-producing countries. There may be countries that come up and surprise us, and when you say things are lost, things can also be found. Right. So we're going to end it on that note.
That was fantastic. What a way to end the conference.